All right, so this is the Rebuild Procurement Podcast. I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side, procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veek, a procurement geek on the client service sell side of the street. I assembled an awesome team of procurement professionals at a company called Summit Procurement, where we do procurement.
Let's just get started here, Alan. So today, we'll see if this holds up at the end or if we change as we go. But we got a few things to talk through. You have I guess Paul Graham. It looks like he did a new drop in his blog. So we'll touch on that and some skip level meetings. You can go into a little bit of that. We can chat about them.
Cool.
I have a bit of the story of Labor Day. So for us as recording this right now, Labor Day was yesterday, but it happens every year. So just go into the story of that and how it came about. And then as any good podcast does, tie it into AI. and then we'll deep dive into, we'll keep it broad right now, see where it goes, but contracts. So contracts management, kind of the sales process internally around how that how people need to understand the importance. So
Cool.
sound good?
Right on.
All right. So you have the first one teed up here with our, not our buddy, but maybe someday our buddy Paul Graham.
One day we'll interview him on the pod if we're ever so lucky. Yeah, so Paul Graham is the founder of Y Combinator, and he's kind of a lifelong startup guy. I think he lives in the UK, if I'm not mistaken. But he started
right.
Y Combinator, which is, I would call it the preeminent startup accelerator in the world. So basically what they do is they hold an open application process. Startup founders who have a crazy idea that needs a little bit of funding and a little bit of time to see, can they get to a most valuable product, a minimal, I guess they call it minimal viable product, MVP, get a little bit of money from Y Combinator. It's become pretty selective. So I'm guessing they see thousands of applications. They choose dozens of companies every year to go through the program. And then a lot of these, I think why it's important and why it's the preeminent accelerator in the world is that they've had several unicorns come out, and if not unicorns, a whole bunch of success stories come out of Y Combinator, including the one that was included in this post. Airbnb rolled out a Y Combinator, one of the early classes of Y Combinator.
Yeah. Can I just give a few of these companies just for sure, folks, Alan?
Please. It's great.
So you have, let's see, you have Reddit, you have, like you said, Airbnb, Gusto, which is an HR software, Instacart, DoorDash, Brex, which, yeah. So there's a bunch.
Yeah, tons. Summit Procurement's not in there. I didn't apply, for the record. I didn't get rejected.
Someday you need a tech. You need a technical co-founder.
Boy, do I. So happily living in the services business. So this latest drop, and he probably has hundreds of articles on his website, hundreds of blog posts on his website. They're all pretty thoughtful and pretty good. I've rarely found a better set of content than what Paul Graham puts out. This one that he released on Saturday morning was called Founder Mode, and it's a super short blog post. Basically, the gist of it is, I think he says up front, hey, I'm just kind of posting this idea, more to come later as we flesh this out. But he said there's definitely a difference. Most startups believe as they grow and morph from being startups into small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, that they need to change the way that they manage employees, the way that the founder operates, so that they can scale more quickly and more rapidly. And the gist of the article is, no, that's not right. When there's a founder who's involved, founder should always stay in founder mode and can keep the company to a certain extent, as long as they're around, in founder mode. You don't actually have to bring in professional management from outside that manages, say, Airbnb, like Procter & Gamble would be managed. That's the gist of the article. And he gave a few examples of founders who've done this before, like Steve Jobs and a couple others. But it's a very compelling article. And one of the things that stood out to me, because of course I'm in founder mode right now. We're 25 people today, and I'm deathly afraid of I'm afraid of two things. Number one, I want to be able to scale the business. I don't know how big I want our business to be. I want our business to be as naturally big as it should be. But I'm afraid of the scaling problem because what we have today is a pretty unique culture where I'm heavily involved. I know everybody by first name. I can pick up the phone and call them, reach out on Microsoft Teams and have a quick chat with them. And I'm afraid of losing that. And I think you definitely lose it as you surpass Dunbar's number, this famous number up. A human being kind of can know as many as about 150 people. I've seen some updates to that given our new social media age. Some people are saying that might be as big as 300 people. But both of those are kind of within sight when you think about how big a company like mine could grow. And I'm always interested in finding out new ways of thinking about how you manage. And to read this article about founder mode was big, and I think it's going to spur a lot of other founders and CEOs and the kind of the smart thinkers in the tech bro world. They're going to start writing a lot about their experiences, and I really look forward to reading all of those. One of the things that jumped from the short article was this notion of skip level meetings. I don't know if everybody knows this terminology. I only know it because my daughter worked for Capital One. They talk a lot about skip levels. So you think about a manager, a team lead, and their direct report. That's kind of that's one level. But when you talk to a skip level, you talk to your team lead's boss. So you kind of you skip a level, you talk one level higher, one level lower. And I've always thought this is a very important part of managing your business because I've oftentimes worked for managers or had people on my team who themselves were not great managers, and you miss information. You have the ability to fall into the trap of letting a bubble of discontent develop inside a business, and you've got to be able to kind of reach above and below and get some really good feedback broadly. So that you don't let these bubbles of discontent grow inside your business. So I definitely loved that idea of skip level meetings, and I immediately wrote it into my plans as I talked to the 4 people who I have report directly to me today, that I'm going to have them help me figure out how to manage skip level meetings with people on their team. And I'll do some random skip level meetings as well. But the notion would be I want to make sure that the people who report into me know that I'm talking to the people who report into them.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, that last piece that you said there. So like internally within cultures, you have like the ones that are very bureaucratic that just go hierarchical. And what happens when you have that distance is the person that reports directly to you, at first they'll be filtering stuff, and then they kind of present stuff the certain way they think you want it or what you've told them you want. And then you start getting bad filtered out. And sometimes
Yep.
there could just be things that aren't reaching you that you could help resolve, and having that conversation with folks that maybe are more doing the work than just presenting the work to you. That's kind of where you can figure out where you can insert yourself to support. You can figure out if the manager's doing a good job. In
Yeah.
so many words, it's not that their reportables need to complain, but just like, are things working the way that I would want them?
That's exactly right. And I do make a good point of getting out and telling the entire team collectively how I want things to work. So, Tom, have you seen any interesting ways to collect that feedback other than directly face to face? Like I know there are the sites like Glassdoor and some others, but that's a little public. Have you seen any other
Yeah,
good ways
Glassdoor's
to?
like
Yeah, it's a little
toxic.
toxic. Yeah,
Yeah, and they
if
end
it's
up being
gotten
about
that,
the company, not about the person.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I've seen, I mean, some companies do like pulse check surveys. So
Hmm.
some might do weekly, too much. Monthly, I think certain folks would say that is also maybe a little too much.
Yeah,
Quarterly is
totally.
where you can get a little more deep if you want. But it's how much all this always rolls back to how important is it to the founder or the CEO. So it kind of is a cultural thing. So if feedback is ingrained in the system,
Hmm.
then it'll happen much more. So to use you as the example, if you receive the feedback all the time and they know, oh, Alan, he feedback machine, just like load him up, then others will do that. Like Netflix has this, they have that internal culture where I don't think they yell at each other, but very open. As do can't remember one of the investment companies, the
Yeah.
investment banking companies.
Yeah, Bridgewater.
What
You're thinking Bridgewater
Bridgewater,
in New
Bridgewater,
Jersey.
like
Yeah.
just unfiltered honesty. I don't know if you necessarily need to be there. You can
Yeah.
filter a little bit, but
Yeah. Oh, I could tell
yeah.
Bridgewater stories because I had a friend who actually ran Bridgewater for a few years, and
Oh
and
yeah,
I knew some people who worked there, and whoo, boy, that can be. They've taken it too far, I think, to the toxic side of things.
agreed. From what I've read,
Yeah.
but and their founder seems like a delightful guy via his books, right?
Super
He's more of a
smart.
thoughtful philosopher at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nevertheless, yeah, those core years where his fire was burning hot,
Yeah.
it was hotter than anybody.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, any virtue can be taken to too far an extreme, and I think that might be the virtue of feedback when you start recording people video and audio, and then playing it back for them in front of groups of people in meetings, and surprises like that. I think it could go too far.
yeah, anything could go too far, right? If I like peanut butter,
Mhm.
I could have that, but I can't have a whole jar every day, or else
Yeah,
something's going to happen.
that's right. I've been told that moderation can't go too far, though, right? Isn't that a saying?
Moderation can't go too far.
Cannot go too far.
Well, I guess
So
yeah. This maybe when it comes to diet, but yeah, I mean, you always want some levels of extreme could be, I think, helpful, but
okay, I like
uh,
that. I like that.
yeah, to the point where uh, it becomes toxic. I think that's where you've gone too far.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, everyone has I guess, a different definition of toxicity too. Maybe not everyone, but
Yeah.
a few people do.
Yeah, so you
Um,
you read that article as well. Anything stand out in particular for you? Any thoughts on the skip levels?
yeah, I mean, it was only so many paragraphs, so it was quite an easy read. So maybe we could put that in the notes. But the reference to Steve Jobs and how he did the offsite. So Apple, when Steve Jobs was running, it was probably like 100,000 people. I'm kind of throwing numbers at the wall, but I think like thereabouts, maybe 200, maybe 80. But nevertheless, more than 25, more than 150, more than 300, right? So him going through and choosing who he felt were like the core folks, core 100 folks of those 100,000 to have an offsite with. I
Hmm.
and that's it. Within a large company, that is a daring thing to do. So you ruffle a lot of feathers. Like the first go, I'm sure a lot of feelings were hurt, which matters too. But for him, the outcome was like, or the I guess the reason was to still have that kind of founder-ish mentality and to have that core group as if you're building it, even though you're 100,000, that core 100, like how can we make what we do better and kind of have those intimate conversations. I thought that was an interesting point that Paul Graham made.
Yeah, I liked it a lot too. I've thought through all the complications that you just offered up about why that would be tough. But as you said it, I started thinking, well, if somebody really wanted to be invited to that meeting and they weren't invited to that meeting, boy, that's feedback right there.
For sure. And that's exactly when I read it too. I was like, huh, how would I feel if I wasn't invited? Like, what can I do to get invited?
That's
It's kind of
right.
my response.
I got to be more of a
Right.
thought
So
leader. Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
I got to start a
So
podcast.
yeah, maybe. And even if Steve never hears it, right?
Right.
But nevertheless, I build up those thoughts and how then and could talk it through with someone like yourself and others of how can I then deliver that value that then can be seen, by this organization. It's always a good thought to have. I think a drive. One thing that as I read this, Alan, it's not a perfect correlation because the company itself is quite bureaucratic, but the Pew, what is now the Pew Foundation, the Pew family ran a company called Sunoco, or it was called Sun Company for a long time. I
Mm-hmm.
knew a lot of people that worked there. And one thing that they had when it was more of a family, so call it like generationally, like forward, right, where you have the family members still involved, but they were a family company for a long time. Even being public, the family still ran them. And what they had always done, and I joined the company after this, but they were very well known for that, like that sense of like just being together and like
Mm-hmm.
uh after work sports. And they had a separate facility that was only for Sunoco employees or Sun
Wow.
Company employees that could still get them together. And the
Mm-hmm.
stories I would hear from the tenured folks was like how great and how bought into like delivering the best at that time for the company, for the pews, because of the way that they were treated. It's stuck with me my whole entire life since I heard it.
Yeah.
Um, so I just think there's also like an aspect of that when it's like they were the family, they kind of took forward the mission of the patriarch that then just fed through the culture, uh, and like kept that like we're gonna work no matter what, like for this family. Really, it always stuck with me, and how they were able to build that.
I'll have to go out and look for something written up on that. That sounds like that would be interesting to read.
Yeah, yeah, the pews. I have to look too, but that's just from verbal conversations with folks that lived it. So,
Cool.
all right. So maybe with that, going to Labor Day here. Uh, so Labor Day was yesterday, and I get interested just with the kind of like why we do things, and what leads to doing certain things certain ways. So we have Labor Day, and that's the general like feeling of Labor Day is okay. It's for the worker, like people that work, which is okay everybody at this point, right? Like this kind of where it goes. You can't wear white after the day, unofficial end of the summer. It kind of turns into different things, right? So like why did we initially start this? So, Alan, let me count this one. Anyway, I'm not going to count it. I was going to give you a trivia question, but I'm going to get it wrong. Uh, so, just going back to like national holidays themselves. So, the U.S. started when we started this. We had four national holidays. It was New Year's, Independence Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Kind of
Hmm.
feels like the core to today.
Yep.
Um, but when you rewind back at this point, almost 150 years, the American worker on average, was working 12-hour days, 7 days a week.
Amazing.
Uh, yeah. So I mean that was core to the American lifestyle. You
Hmm.
just think put yourself in the 1850s, 1870s. We were transitioning. The U.S. was transitioning from an agricultural led economy to more the manufacturing led economy. So there was that happening. I mean, children were still working in manufacturing, like 5 to 6 years old, which feels unthinkable at this point, but that was how it was.
Yeah, they did it on
So
the farm, I guess, when we made the switch from agriculture. Why not,
true.
just put them in the factory?
Yeah,
Same,
you
same
work as
story.
a kid.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, very true. That's a yeah, very good point. Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of immigrants coming to the U.S. from European countries, Ireland, and other agriculturally focused countries, and coming to work. They have big families. They have their kids. Yeah, that definitely tracks. To work on the farm is really why they would do that
Yep.
in many cases. But so they're working 12-hour days, 7 days a week. Then there starts to be riots, right? Unions are forming. They're coming together saying, if we're together, the man can't push us down. So there starts being different riots. There was the Haymarket riot
Yep.
in Chicago. So that had happened in 1886. In September of 1882, there was 10,000 workers that went from City Hall to Union Square, and that was the first Labor Day parade.
Hmm.
And then, just as it went down in 1894, President Grover Cleveland, um, he came about and said that Labor Day had officially started. So that's kind of where it came. But like just to rewind a little bit and summarize, I mean, it was a lot of just how folks were treated at the time, the hours worked, and then folks coming together to gain power, and then from there push for Labor Day, which then rolls into lesser work weeks. Now, from when you and I are born to now, like a 40-hour work week, 5 days a week is different than 12-hour days, 7 days a week.
Just a little
And then
different.
yeah, huh?
Just a little different.
A little different, yeah, like half.
Yeah.
So then it leads me to think, and I don't know how much I agree with this yet because I don't know where this goes, and I don't know. I kind of feels weird even thinking, but like the work week, is it 40 hours?
Hmm.
So on a go forward basis, is a full time salary something that's a 40-hour work week, 5 days a week, or is it different? With AI coming in, I mean, templates can be generated in seconds just by prompting
Yep.
in ChatGPT. Like where do you think that goes? Just with the in the spirit of Labor Day.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've thought about this a ton. I've dreamt about it a ton. I think
Looking for that lesser work week, Alan? Is that,
yeah,
or you want to go back to 12-hour days?
well, okay, wait. That's those aren't mutually exclusive options,
I
right?
agree.
So
I
I
agree.
like the notion of the flex hours that some people work 4 days a week, 12-hour days, or maybe I'm sorry, rewind that. It is 4-day work week, 10 hours a day.
Yeah, four
Feels
tens as
four
called in
tens.
manufacturing.
Yeah, that feels like that's kind of a no-brainer. It feels like that's where we should go. I would rather have my days be a little bit busier, a little bit longer, but then have leisure time that's a little bit more spelled out. I just that makes a ton of sense. It does feel like we've been on this ledge of 5-day, 8-hour days, 5 days a week, 8-hour days, the 5/8 for a long time. So it must be a particular island of stability. But I think it does feel to me that in the next, let's be super conservative, 50 years, I think we'll see the 4-day work week.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot depends on what's being done and what's being produced for who. So to the extent that 24 like you to the extent that 24-hour a day like jobs, right? Not working them, but you need around the clock support. Like what will that look like um, when robots come into play, right? Like you might
Mm-hmm.
manufacture, and not even robots. Let's just say more things get automated within like the physical environment.
Right.
Like what will that mean, and for the support and uptime, and how many people do you need there? And then also from a customer service standpoint, a lot of that goes around the world right now anyway with the
Agreed.
hours
Yep.
and supported that way. But it's kind of, we almost need to go in and like break down what it is that needs to be done and then what work needs to be done to get to that output.
Right. I like that thinking. I also, the thing that comes to mind for me, the reason why the 410 is so attractive. When I'm sitting and reading things like the Founder Mode blog by Paul Graham, I am hyper creative. And when
Hmm.
I'm churning during my 5/8s, uh, I'm not super creative. I'm just churning. I'm just trying to keep my head above water and get stuff done. I think that a longer work week, especially as we move toward more knowledge work, uh, as we automate maybe some more of the manufacturing factory floor, and you've got less of that in the hands of people. More people are going to be gravitating towards knowledge work, and the knowledge work really benefits from that extra dose of creativity because the famous saying is innovation happens when ideas have sex, right? So two disparate ideas come together, that's when you have innovation. You need that form of creativity to keep the engine of growth and kind of the pushing the frontiers of knowledge happening. And so I think a 3-day work week might, a 3-day weekend might actually help that.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd also worked at one point it got big 980s. So it was 9-hour days for week one. So for 5 hours, you work 45 hours in one week. And then the next week you do but on that Friday you work eight. So it's 9 9 9 8 and then 9 9 9 9 off.
Yeah.
If I said that properly. Normally we're working with 5 days there. So add a nine if I didn't say it.
Yep.
But yeah, that was also, it was always beneficial. And then to your point of just that space, like there's just things that need to happen, especially if you're working, if we go back to in the office environment, there's things that need to happen. And with that, you have to have time to do other stuff. So
Yeah.
it might be one way to get folks back into if that's a drive of an organization.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, in my world, but I would say because we have knowledge workers by and large, I let them set their own hours. So they could work, in theory, a 4-day work week if they wanted to. The problem is that our clients, by and large, work 5-day work weeks. So I think we'll always be in line behind our clients. As our clients drive some innovation like a 4-day work week, 410s, then we'll be able to do the same thing. But I think, there's fuzziness around the edges of this whole thing. So I'm certain that a lot of my team members do things other than the strict 5/8s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always been one to log on after work too.
Yep.
Right, that's just kind of what I do.
You're a striver,
It's
Tom. You're a striver.
Yeah. Well, it depends the hours you work and who you're supporting, and I
Yeah.
kind of got in that mode. It's
You're trying to
I don't know. Maybe it's not always healthy, but
yeah,
it's healthy for me.
you're trying to get into that Steve Jobs top 100 meeting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you have to know how to get in first. For those, maybe it's yeah. For him, it was probably just don't stop.
Yes.
Um, that was an intense person. But yeah, again, yeah, hang around with that intensity, then that brings in up levels your intensity,
Yep.
which is a cool thing. Um, so yeah, so I guess maybe from there, Alan, maybe we go into this deep dive. So just to tee this up a bit, so and I can give a little background for why it even popped in my mind. It was just around contracts management. So someone I know, just say they're dear to me. They they were having some work done at their house, and a piece of that was concrete work. So this is like totally personal at their house, like still concrete, not cheap. Um, but you have high expectations for things you pay a decent amount of money for, of which this person did. And I went over there, like they were all excited. They'd also waited a long time to have it done. And you start walking around, and it's like it was that stamped concrete, and it's not smooth. You could tell at points like they like probably pulled off the boards or whatever the stamp is, and like pieces came off, so they like threw concrete on top of it. I mean, it was like
Uh,
they had wheelbarrow marks.
janky.
That very janky. Piece was cracked. This is on like this is around a decent sized pool too, so it goes all around, right? It's like cracked from the pool over to the side. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, did you document it? Like, still waiting on the contract. So I'm like, I do this stuff for my like I've had to go back and have hard conversations with even companies that are good companies to talk through it, and some that are bad. You have to be super firm, like written letter, things of that nature. So I was like, did you talk to him? I'll get the contract eventually. But I was like, let's go around. I was over there for the Labor Day party yesterday. And before we got there early, so I'm like, okay, like this is what we got to do: walk around, take pictures, circle the areas, make comments.
Yep.
When I came home, I was writing this letter at like 11:30,
And
and
that's
then
when you
sent it over
posted
to
on
him.
that's when you posted on X. You were like,
Well,
"Hey,
that's what I posted after
yes."
was done the letter. I think because it was like, what? How crazy is this? The
Yeah.
person even also put it on Instagram, supposedly.
Hmm.
Like, look at this oasis. Like, this is broken. Zoom in. Um, so, nevertheless, that got me to stirring uh, about contract management and the importance, and then how that rolls into explaining things to your customers, your internal stakeholders, and the importance of getting through a contract and not just rushing. So,
Yep.
does any of that resonate with you up front?
Well, funny you ask whether it resonates. I would say 90% of our revenue at Summit Procurement comes from contracts management. And I'm an
Mm,
old procurement guy where, when you say procurement, in my mind, what pops up is sourcing. Like that's where the value of procurement comes in. It's good sourcing. So it's kind of funny that I run a business now that has so much contracts management involved. I think I have 11, at last count, 11 JDs as a part of my team of 25. 11 of them have JDs past the bar, and they do all this contracts management work. So I oftentimes say, gosh, are my clients really experiencing the value of these contracts? By and large, they're in financial services. So I think that the regulatory nature of financial services says yes, they are seeing the value of that, because otherwise the regulators breathing down your neck give you all kinds of guff. So yeah, this is what a big chunk of my team does day in, day out. They are authoring contracts, talking with internal stakeholders to make sure they've gotten it right. Are there any other details they've missed? Reaching out to suppliers or prospective suppliers to see, can you sign this thing? Do we need to do a few red lines? And then also walking these early contracts through the entire organization. So you got to oftentimes take it to not just to legal, you got to take it to IT, you have to take it to HR. There are a whole bunch of other stakeholders inside the business, other than the stakeholders who's buying the good or service, who have a say. They want to weigh in. So it's actually a complex choreography. I'm amazed daily at the hard work that my team does in churning out these contracts. And so I think the short answer, Tom, it's important.
Yeah. And you don't see the benefits until after you have a problem,
Yep.
generally. Of course, if you're within a regulated industry, that's like table stakes for being in that industry. But having worked on capital projects and where you're spending, let's call it lots of money,
Yep.
like on big pieces of equipment that take 6 months, 12 months to make, and they're not hitting milestones, whatever. The ships are leaving without waiting for you. Like these things that really you can only go back and look and say, hey, like it was written differently. Like now you have to pay us, and is many cases you don't even want to you don't really want to sue people. Like not only is it expensive, it's also like exhausting and
Hmm.
like takes a lot of people's internal time, and
And
but you
and
have
you're
to, it allows you to be firm and get what you agreed to.
yes, and you're talking about it from the point of view of the buying organization. As a supplier, oftentimes buyers don't live up to their end of the agreement, and
For sure.
so it's like, yeah, you
Well, if
really don't want
if we're to
to.
have this back and forth, Alan, I would say our only thing that we need to do is pay you,
Yes.
which maybe is probably the biggest one too, right?
No, actually, no. In my statements of work, because we're in this heavily two-part agreement with each other, there are things I stipulate that my clients need to do, like meet quarterly with me to tell me am I doing a good job. Otherwise, stuff gets swept under the rug, and then a year later it comes out, oh no, you didn't do this. No, no, no. I need to know about that as soon as possible so I can affect change and keep this relationship on the up and up. So I do build some things into my contracts. Obviously, over those things, I'm not going unless they don't pay me. Even if they don't pay me, I'm not suing my client. Right? It's just not going
Of
to happen.
course.
But I do like to memorialize those things in statements of work so that people understand expectations. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah, statements of work is where a lot of this happens. Like having a good written,
Mm-hmm.
clear, signed off on, this is what I expect and this is what I agree to, like from both
Mm-hmm.
sides. That'll be a separate deep dive for us because there's so much there that I mean, a lot of companies don't do well, and it's a they change all the time too.
Of
So
course.
a scope of work for your software, which maybe that's like super simple, that's like just give me this thing, is different than like I need you to perform services, whether those are on-site, off-site, like available hours to your point, like
Yep.
all of those things. Like for if you're if they're supplying you something, what percent uptime is there? If they don't have uptime, then what are they going to do? What are they going to pay? I've within big equipment, it was like a giant water filtration system, right? And that water filtration system was supposed to remove X number of like particulates, and it didn't. This is like I think over $1 million. This specific instance, and it didn't. Therefore, that company, because it was written in the contract the way we had it, that company had to provide like uh, like auxiliary. They had to provide extra portable units until they could resolve the big one that we were buying. And
Yep.
they made no money on that contract, but that was the right thing to do from the client's perspective,
Yep.
but also is what we agreed to. Like, I need good water. You
Oh
said
yeah.
you could do it in a certain period of time at a certain level. Like, that's on you
Yep.
guys.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're right. We will have many future pod episodes on statements of work because it's the sort of thing that it's asymptotically approaching good, but we're still early days of writing good SOWs as an industry. I think that
Mm.
it's there's a lot of science left and science and art left to be figured out in the world of SOWs because they're just difficult to do. Um, yeah, and speaking about service level agreements or KPIs written inside SOWs, I tend to very often not get too bent out of shape about those KPIs because they're oftentimes hard to define. You don't know how to define them until you're actually doing the work. So if a client says, "Hey, we expect 100% um, uh, stakeholder satisfaction when you're doing your contracts management work with us," oftentimes I will have a discussion that says, now you do understand that that's almost physically impossible to achieve, but I'm happy to sign the SOW. And why don't we find out where that KPI should be set through our quarterly management reviews? Like, if we come in and we got 50% customer sat happening, okay, now we gotta take this up. This is not going to be good. But 100% is likely unachievable. So why don't we find out the 92.5% where it should be set? I think,
Yeah, especially where you bring in feelings.
yeah,
100% is tough to hit.
yeah, it is tough. That's what makes SOWs tough, oftentimes, especially in the services realm, because whether it involves feelings or something else, it's squishy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, which always goes back to that's why procurement is measured on savings because other things get squishy.
Yeah, squishy fast.
Yeah, the just I think we sort of went through those, but just some of like the non-scope things, the like everyone sort of and just kind of how do you then for me within contracts, like the importance is it comes down to risk. So what's the risk tolerance of the organization? I've had suppliers sign up, like you'll one thing that makes the contract so easy is just when you have templates. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone kind of knows that you're going to talk about indemnity. Like if you're going to support a company, you know you need to have certain levels of insurance. Like there is a lot of basicness to the back and forth that some can stomach, some can't, based upon the what risk will do. Like if something bad happens versus someone that's just trying to maybe get market share, things of that nature. But I just remember just one story just around like COVID,
Mm.
which is a very generic one. And I think a lot of people would resonate with this just around force majeure. So if you had just
Oh
off
boy.
the cuff sent out a credit card to somebody for something important, I don't know, just say for a large sum of money, if your credit could handle that, the what that would protect you versus a contract when COVID hit,
Yep.
totally different things. Um, just having the language, because everyone had the same exact language. Everyone was basically like, you know, if it's a hurricane, if it's this, if that, riots, okay. Pandemic hits, turns out that's force majeure. Companies can put off billion-dollar projects. They can do this, they can
Yep.
do that because that is force majeure. The world shut down. But if
Mm-hmm.
you didn't have a contract in place, or if you didn't with some major suppliers, you'd be really up the creek without a paddle, right? You'd be really kind of screwed.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because the contracts and the contracts management process becomes a place where you embody continuous improvement and continuous learning. So if you did find yourself a shop that didn't have force majeure in contracts and it became important to you, guess what? Now post COVID, you're guaranteed to have those in every contract you're going to sign. So it's a way that you kind of embody best practices in the way you do business.
yeah. And to push back on myself a little bit there, I do think when companies get larger, there's always this land grab that happens within organizations. Like, what can I do to grow my department and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of it leans on that risk side of things,
Mm.
where as someone that likes efficiency, it could kind of be exhausting, right? So I think there is a balance of what is risky and what is not. And the answer is not everything is super risky.
Mm-hmm.
So things can be done on a purchase order versus like a full blown contract. And that's a good conversation to have internally at organizations, within organizations,
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, you make it only as complicated as it needs to be, no more complicated.
for sure. And balance that risk. Understand where you could take risk and where you can't.
Like that. Yep.
Um, Last one we had on here, I don't know if I teed this up at the beginning, but you had performance reviews.
That's a big one, though. I maybe we tee it up here and we say,
Okay.
what have Tom? What has been your experience with performance reviews? We're about to roll out an official performance review policy at Summit Procurement, and I think I've read and touched and talked to a bunch of people who have good thoughts on this. But when have you what have you seen that is good, and what have you seen that is bad?
The best is when the manager has ongoing conversations.
Right on.
So, like the tweaks here and there, like way more impactful than like that manager that doesn't really like to talk to their folks that kind of surprises them once per year or even quarterly. So, if I'm to be honest, uh, I'll speak about this both as a manager and as an individual contributor. Like they're kind of exhausting, right?
Yeah.
From an employee, from an individual contributors or someone that's just reporting through, they feel important, but they shouldn't feel like the end of the world by any means. And then from the management side, there's so much documentation, and if you have if you have a very large team, then that sucks up like a
Yeah.
week and a lot of thought. And everyone's going to use ChatGPT now. So, I mean, how even great is that? Um, those are my thoughts on that, Alan. Just to summarize it, ongoing conversation beats out quarterly or yearly in any ways,
Agreed.
in every single way.
Yeah, when feedback or advice comes up, it should be delivered within 24, 48 hours, I think is kind of a best practice, because then it's relevant. Otherwise, it becomes a history lesson of sorts. And I
Mm.
wondered, let me poke you a little, or push you a little bit on your point of view of documentation being the deadly killer. It feels to me like when you deliver this huge thing called performance review that's annual at the end of the year, it feels like that's the heavy documentation waste of time. Do you think that that applies in a world where you're giving feedback weekly, monthly, quarterly, or does that change?
Yeah, I think to go back to we've had a bunch of conversations on notes. I think if things are just properly just written up
Right.
as you go along, I think anybody that's reporting through anyone else should write weekly summaries of themselves and send that to their leader. I think there's a version of that that matters a lot. It might not be weekly, but there should just be this ongoing summary, because it stinks from the reason it is horrible is when you don't do that and you're like, oh my gosh, like I feel bad not including the stuff from earlier this year, but I don't even remember
Yeah.
like the greatness that happened.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. So as soon as we're off of this pod, I'm going to go write that into my performance review, because I actually didn't embody anything about documentation. And I think there has to be a minimum level of documentation that says this conversation was had, this was the advice or feedback that was delivered. Here were the steps that should be taken. Something so that it's written down. Otherwise, it's not intentional.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people aren't good at notes. I'm this person at times too. I'm staying in one place now, but really one place is probably two. And then every so often, I'm like, a Post-it note. Let me use that. Right. Haven't seen one of you in a while.
That's
So
right. Let's
then
go
something
old
ends up
tech.
on a Post-it note under the monitor. Right. So things get tough. Like, I think that's just I know it's an ongoing learning for me.
Yep.
But if you can, I write a summary every single week. It's called This Week in Procurement. And it's the things that I do this week. I do it
Wow.
every single week. I've done it, but this is only within the past year. I've done it more than a year now. Every single week, I have This Week in Procurement, and I can search my email and it's in there. Um,
That could
but
almost be
that's
the
big
name
for
of
me.
this podcast, by the way, This Week in Procurement. That wouldn't
Yeah,
have been too
Jason
bad.
Calacanis might sue us,
Yeah,
but
he might. Yeah.
but but yeah, I do think that ongoing documentation, and it's also a Simon Sinek thing, right? You're a
Hmm.
Simon Sinek guy,
I
right?
am.
The like start with why, like what's the reason of doing this? Like, oh, you want to do that because um, at the end of the year it's going to be much easier. But yeah, I mean, I think what it probably boils down to, if I'm being honest with like myself and just who we are as human beings, like we don't really always like to be told what to do. We like to do what we want.
Yep.
And I like to take notes right now.
Hmm.
Therefore, I'm doing it.
Yep.
I know how to stay ahead, and that's what works.
Yep.
But if I didn't always do that. So I think it is some of that too.
Yep. I like that. So yeah, so that was fun. That's kind of the feedback I was looking for regarding performance reviews. Just it feels like the world has gone that direction of timely feedback, no big annual process, and that's what we're going to roll out at Summit Procurement. And I I tell everybody we're at step 2 of 10. So this version of performance reviews will be what we start with, but it'll get better over time, just like it did with that conversation. I'm going to include something about documentation. So thanks for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, of course. No, that'll be fun. What are the other things that you have in there that are like the core principles of after having all this outside the pod conversation? Like, what are your big takeaways about what's right outside of maybe documentation?
Yeah. So I like one of the things that I read about in somebody else's performance review is, again, you put the onus on the person who's receiving feedback to come with some thoughts of their own. So one of the things that we're including in this is the week before the quote unquote formal performance review is given, and we're stipulating it should happen at least once every 8 weeks. And to put that in perspective, my team leads meet with their team members every week for 30 minutes. Sometimes those meetings don't happen if they don't need to happen, but there's something on the calendar for every week, 30 minutes. So once in every 8 of those meetings, you'll deliver some form of feedback. And what we start with is ask the team member 3 things they did well in the intervening 8 weeks and 3 things that they could have done better. And this allows for a chance, I think, for some back and forth, so it doesn't become specific feedback as much as it is, here's my experience. Okay, I did witness this in you. Here's what I've witnessed in other people who do this really well. It allows for not just for, I think, a broader discussion to happen. It allows for the person who's receiving feedback to be a bit more reflective ahead of time, instead of just getting kind of boom, hit in the face with, here's something I want to tell you. So it's not a surprise.
Do you get a lot? I know you haven't rolled it out yet. I wonder if the what I could have done better was, I think I could have not tried as hard.
Yes, yeah. I worked too many hours.
Yeah. I worked too many hours. I wasn't efficient enough. I put too many hours on this specific client.
Weakness.
Next time, yeah, I should be able to do it in less time.
Well, see, that's great, because it was initially worded as what are the 3 weaknesses, but this is so very specifically, you say 3 things you could have done better since the last discussion, not just overall in your life. But so I think it makes people sit back and say, okay, in the last 8 weeks, what could I have done better? I bet they've got some thoughts on that. They should be thinking about that. I want them to think about that. It's definitely in keeping with our mission, which is to become the best version of yourself. So that's one of the things that's on the list. Another thing that I'm thinking about putting on the list is, I read an interesting article about whether your team members are mercenaries or missionaries. So 2 ends of the spectrum. And I thought I would make that actually something that should be talked about at least once every year. Do you view yourself as a mercenary or a missionary? And then how do I view you as the team lead? How do I think about you? And that might start some good conversations, because I actually included that in my interview thinking, so that when I meet somebody and interview them for 30 minutes, at the end, I want to force binary fit. Are they a mercenary or are they a missionary? Because I think I need missionaries, certainly in the startup phase of my business. When I'm in founder mode, I want the missionaries. And I've certainly met plenty of mercenaries.
Yeah. And to maybe just define that a little bit, the missionaries are the ones that are really down to like do whatever it takes, kind of behind the country, behind the company. Whereas mercenaries, they're kind of paid to go to war for you.
Yeah, that's right.
So they'll probably come in with high skill set, but they're there for the dollar, and then they can go on to something else.
Yep, that's right. So I need people who are behind my mission. They're missionaries. I want them to want to become the best version of themselves, not just nod their head north-south because they think that's going to be what makes me happy. So I'm looking for the people who are behind the mission, the missionaries, for sure.
Yeah, super important. I agree.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a future episode where we go over this in some depth, and I'll show kind of the form that I think we're going to build it into a form so that people can be intentional and write things down, but I want to make it very easy for people. We'll have a training around how to do performance reviews. I've got a lot of fun little video clips to show about people receiving and giving feedback that make it a little bit humorous.
Yeah. I think everyone ever put together is humorous, even if it's supposed to be serious.
Yes, yeah, it is good. So we'll maybe we'll do a deeper dive on that in a future pod. Yeah. All right.
So, all right, Alan, is that the pod?
That's the pod. Another one in the can.
All right. Good deal.
Yeah, I think, Tom, at the end you should always say bye-bye.
Bye-bye?
Yeah, like Nostradamus.
Yeah, Jason.
Does. Yeah.
Bye-bye. I have to come up with my own.
Yeah.
Later.
Later, suckers.
Yeah, later. Yeah. Peace. Thanks for joining us on the Rebuild Procurement podcast. Check in weekly for new episodes and subscribe for alerts.